All right, it's 2:02. I think I will get going. I still have some housekeeping and things like that to do in the beginning before we really get started anyway, so people can get settled in as I'm doing that. Hello, I am Dr. Christy Wendelberger. I'm the Climate Smart Project Director at Rodale Institute. Today I'm going to be talking about using cover crops in organic vegetable systems. So for today, my goal is just to teach you what it is about cover crops, like why do they work, what do they do, what's the value in having a cover crop, and just kind of the biology behind it on what makes cover crops so effective. And then at the end, I'm going to give a little plug for my newest project, which is the Climate Smart Project. And I'll talk about that just a little bit. It's using cover crops, and we will go from there. So let's get started. Figure out how to advance my screen. There we go. So just some housekeeping. Check that you can hear me. If you can't hear me, if there isn't any, if it's not audible, then click your audio settings on your screen and kind of navigate through that. And that should help you get it so you can hear me. There will be question and answers at the end of the presentation, and please use the question and answer button on your screen to send me questions at the end of the presentation. Please do not use the chat. I am looking at my screen, so I know what slides are coming next. So I will be not looking at the chat anyway, and I don't want to miss your questions. So please, don't use the chat for your questions. If you have any problems with the webinar, getting logged on, any kind of issues with the webinar, please contact Justin Barclay. He's our education manager, and his phone number is there on the screen. And then recordings of this presentation will be posted on our website in about a week. And after this, please keep an eye out for future webinars on our website. We always have new ones coming. I want to thank the funders. So this presentation doesn't have really specific research that we've done at Rodale, but I was the Southeast Organic Center research director when I created this presentation. So I want to thank the Rodale Institute and supporters of the Rodale Institute and the Southeast Organic Center. A lot of the pictures that you're going to see in the presentation are from a project that was funded by the USDA Organic Transitions Program, and the PI on that project was Clemson University as our collaborators. And then very soon I will be funded under the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities grant, which is a grant that I wrote for the USDA to try to find ways to improve farming practices for greenhouse gas emissions, soil health, and figure out ways to market climate smart commodities so that we can get the value that it is worth that we put into it for when we're farming. I'm going to go over what we're going to talk about today. Why would you use cover crops? What's their value? How do cover crops work? Talk a little bit about their roots. I'm going to talk about their impact on nutrients in the soil, their impact on erosion, on nutrient scavenging, nitrogen fixation, soil organic matter, the soil microbial community, weed control, let's see, pest control, nematodes specifically in this as my example, cover crop mixes, and then I'm going to do my plug for the Climate Smart Project. And after that, we'll do a question and answer about this presentation and anything else that I've gone over. So that's what you can expect, and let's get started. So why would you use cover crops? I think a lot of people understand what that cover crops are valuable and what they can do. Some of those things are, we're told, they improve soil health. and they rebuild soil organic matter, and that cover crops help with aeration, and they help with soil compaction and infiltration and flood control. We're told that they help with water retention and help the soil microbial community. We're also told that they improve ecosystem services. So they, it's not advancing there. So they help with nutrient and water cycling. They help support biodiversity in the root system and within the soil system, so the fauna in the soil as well. They help with erosion and nitrate pollution. They were told they help with air quality and reducing nitrous oxide emissions. And we're told they help sequester carbon, and they help with weed control and pest control. And then we're also told they help with yield. And so, but all right, that's what we're told. But what is it about cover crops that can do all this magic? How does this happen? Well, they're also, we also know that they can have an impact on climate change. And there's a lot that we know about this, and there's a lot that we don't know about the impacts that cover crops have for climate change. So there have been literature reviews, a review of 5 papers and 26 research studies that showed that cover crops have the potential to sequester approximately 60 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year when planted across 20 million acres. And that can offset 12.8 million passenger vehicle emissions. That seems pretty cool. Like, that's a lot. But there's also other research out there that says there isn't an impact, or that it has the opposite impact, because it's making the soil more alive, and so there's more activity happening, and therefore more gases are being are emitting from the soil. So especially in the Southeast, we just don't know a lot about how cover crops really are impacting greenhouse gas emissions. And I will talk about a little bit later at the end of the project about the Climate Smart project, because that is what we are hoping to answer with the Climate Smart project, or at least get a little bit closer to the answer on what it is that, on how cover crops influence climate change and influence carbon emissions in both organic and conventional farming. So how do cover crops work? What is the thing that makes them do all these things? Mainly, it's the root system. So if you look at this beautiful, what I think of as a beautiful depiction of the root system of different cover crops, you can see that some cover crops, like this daikon radish, it has some fibrous roots. This is the daikon radish. It's kind of hard to see the writing there. It has some fibrous roots, but mostly these roots, it has this big taproot right at the top of the soil, and then it also pushes roots down deep into the soil. But then if you look at over here, this annual ryegrass, the roots do go somewhat deep, but they are so compact all through here, very dense, very fibrous roots. And then there's a whole slew of different structures of roots that, depending on the variety of cover crop that you use, will depend on the root structure that it is providing to the underground soil. So all these different roots will go into the ground and impact compaction, aeration, infiltration, and erosion differently, each of the different root structures. So you can imagine this one here, where the annual ryegrass has so many fibrous roots, and it's that if you picture when it is terminated, all those roots dying are leaving all these tunnels, tons and tons of fibrous tunnels. And those tunnels have impacted compaction. They've broken up some of the compacted soil. Excuse air is now able to penetrate beneath the soil layer down into the root zone through this tunneling of roots. Water is able to, when it rains really heavy, water, instead of just running off the soil, water penetrates through this tunneled root system, old root system that now is just, a breath of infiltration area for infiltration for soil or for water. And then with erosion, if you have roots like this, like these ryegrass roots, that is going to hold on to soil. And really, even your rapeseed, it's not as dense, but it's going out across the top of the soil and it's holding on to the soil. So it's helping to prevent erosion during times that you would normally not have plants on the ground because it's winter or it's the dead of summer and you live in Florida. So how do they impact nutrients? A lot of it is through soil erosion. They do it in several different ways. One of them is from preventing soil erosion. Iowa has lost an average of 6.8 inches of topsoil since 1850. So that's an example of the need for holding on to this topsoil that we all know contains the nutrients that are growing our crops. So that is very important, and cover crops can put those fibrous roots in the ground and hold it there until it's the next planting season. $37.6 billion has been lost in the US each year in productivity because of this erosion, which again is not needed. It doesn't have to happen if you use cover crops when you don't have a cash crop. And then in addition to that, the dust alone created from this soil blowing off the land when there isn't roots in the ground, it's abrasive on your lungs. It creates air pollutant. It carries about 20 human infectious diseases, and it carries agri-chemicals from the field. So whatever you put on this on the ground, on your soil, if it has residue in it and it's sitting there, then it will come up with the dust, and then that's getting into you and your families and your neighbors' respiratory system. So it's important to be able to keep the soil on the ground for the environment, for your yield, because you are just losing nutrients, and for your bottom line dollar, to keep from having to just add nutrients that are just running off the property. Oh, one more piece I forgot. 60% of eroded soil ends up in rivers, streams, and lakes. And that is also a really big environmental issue with farming, with poor farming practices that allow erosion and allow all the nutrients to go out into your water system. Places like these pictures in South Florida, they end up having a lot of what's called toxic algae blooms. Essentially, if it is a freshwater body and it's near farming these days in the world, it probably has, if it doesn't have regularly, have issues with toxic algae. And so these algae blooms are coming because of all the nutrients that are running off of farmlands and getting into the water table or into the water system, the watershed. That water runs down and then it gets into the prime condition where it's nice and warm, and maybe the water is stagnant in that area and there's lots of nutrients, and these algae just start blooming. And these are very toxic algae. They're toxic to humans. They're a hepatotoxin, so they're bad for your liver. They're bad for your respiratory system. They've been linked to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and they do all that to humans. So imagine what they're doing that to the wildlife that is living in those systems. So you can help decrease these toxic algae blooms in places that are far away from you, just by putting cover crops on the ground and keeping your nutrients on your property instead of allowing it to go down into the stream, which then eventually makes its way to whatever large body of water that you have nearby. Cover crops can also be nutrient scavengers. So some common nutrient scavenging cover crops are barley, oats, rye, triticale, wheat, buckwheat, mustards, brassicas, and foraging radishes. But there's others. These are just some of the common ones. They tend to gather nutrients at the end of the season. So if you put inputs onto your property, you have nutrients that you put on your farm, and it's the end of the season and your cash crop didn't use up all of those nutrients, then a cover crop will use those nutrients. And so they just hold on to them and keep them within the plant. And that will help prevent that nutrient from washing out and going out into the system, into your watershed system. They reduce on average 48% of nitrogen leaching. They can take up to 30 to 150 pounds per acre in nitrogen. And they can recycle nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. They're just very good at growing and metabolizing and photosynthesizing, and to do all those things, they need all those nutrients, just like your cash crops do. And so they take that up for you, and then it's just kind of sitting there in this little package in the roots, in the plant material, waiting to be available to your cash crop in the next season. They also, cover crops can also can impact nutrient levels using legumes. I think a lot of us understand that. We know that legumes add nitrogen to the system. So basically, nitrogen fixation happens when nitrogen from the air goes in, there's photosynthesis, and then those plants are exuding photosynthetic byproducts into their roots. And the roots form this symbiotic relationship with bacterium, and the bacterium will then fix the nitrogen. And that's what makes it available to this your cash crops in the next season. You can get 50 to 150 pounds per acre of nitrogen fixation, depending on the legume that you use. You can reduce the amount of fertilizers needed if you're growing cover crops and you're adding nitrogen to the soil, and you have a heavy nitrogen feeder cash crop coming ahead. You might be able to eliminate adding nitrogen to a nitrogen input at the beginning of the season, or you might be able to reduce it and at least not put as much down. And that can save you. It can save you in costs, it can save you in time, and just in general make things more, just kind of flow better on the farm. Cover crops also help with soil organic matter. Soil organic matter, as you guys I'm sure know, is plant and animal tissue in different compositional states. We're usually looking for between 2 and 5% of soil organic matter in our good soils. Rodale Institute has a long-term study called the Farming Systems Trial, and that study found that cover crop soils accumulated more soil organic matter and had higher total carbon and nitrogen than the other treatments that didn't have cover crops. So this is something that happens. Cover crops, especially if you terminate by rolling them and you allow the residue to stay on the land and decompose over the course of the cash crop season, then you can get, you just get more soil organic matter and you get more carbon and nitrogen in the soil. There are major indicators. Soil organic matter is a major indicator of soil health. So the more soil organic matter you have, the more you have aggregate stability. And that comes from the mycelium of fungi producing glomalin that will then, it just gloms your soil together. So it basically makes your soil stick and glue together through, and cover crops are what help make that happen. They improve aeration. So when you have nice soil organic matter and it's nice and fluffy, you have more aeration in your soil. It improves water drainage, same reason. Water can then infiltrate it easier than when it's super compact. And it reduces soil erosion by keeping those aggregates together and keeping the aggregate stability together. And they also reduce nutrient leaching kind of in the same way, keeping the aggregates together, increasing the microbial community, keeping everything right there on the property. So soil organic matter can increase soil ability to supply calcium, magnesium, and potassium. It can improve buffering capacity and stabilizes pH. And it accelerates the decomposition. Oh, wow, what's going on? Sorry, I put my hand on my keyboard. It accelerates the decomposition of minerals in the soil, increasing plant uptake ability, feeds the soil fauna, and promotes microbial diversity. So you get all of this from soil organic matter that you get from residue from cover crops, whether you roll that cover crop down or you flail mow it, however you decide to terminate it, these residues stay behind and help create soil organic matter that then does all of these benefits for you on your farm. So cover crops also help with soil microbes. We've kind of talked a little bit, but I'll go into a little bit more depth now. So the way cover crops help soil microbes is they improve the microbial habitat. They create soil temperature regulation. So if you have a cover crop on the ground and it is growing, the green part, the above ground biomass of the cover crop will keep the soil cool during really hot days. It will also keep the soil warm if there's a cold snap. Root tunneling will increase the microbial habitat by essentially, if you just like I was saying earlier, these fibrous roots, they go down, they create these tunnels, and then when those roots die, they leave the tunnels behind. And those tunnels help with infiltration, bringing water down to where the microbes are, and they need water for survival. Aeration, bringing air down to where the microbes are, again, so that they can breathe and metabolize. Root exudates, which are plants photosynthesize, and then they exude out of their roots these simple sugars and amino acids, and that is essentially food for microorganisms. And then when they're decomposing, they leave behind carbon and nitrogen. So if you can imagine, these the roots are creating the house by creating the tunnels. They're supplying food by coating the tunnels in these root exudates. They're supplying water, they're supplying air, and then they're also decomposing and supplying carbon and nitrogen, which is more food. So that's just this perfect habitat for the microbes to grow and develop. And then the microbes help the soil by decomposing the soil, decomposing the plant material that's within the soil, helping with nutrient retention and cycling. So as those microbes are consuming the simple sugars, the amino acids, the carbon, the nitrogen, decomposing other organisms and plant material in the soil, they are releasing and cycling those nutrients and making them more available to the plants when it's time for them to grow and produce for you. And then they also help with aeration because they are just creating these colonies, and the fauna that can exist off of the microbes when they're eating them will tunnel through and help increase aeration in the soil, and they stabilize soil carbon. So one of the ways that you can sequester carbon through the microbial system is carbon is up in the atmosphere. It goes into the plants and then the plants photosynthesize. They exude some of that carbon out into their roots. When the roots die, they decompose some of that carbon. So they've brought the carbon from the air into the plant, turned it into plant tissue, turned it into exudates. The exudates in the plant tissue are then underground, decomposing, leaving that carbon underground. The microbes then eat all that carbon, And then when the microbes die, it's called necromass, microbial necromass. And that is just little tiny pockets of carbon that sits there in the soil. And so that's how we sequester carbon, through using cover crops, because they are improving and supporting the microbial community that then plays a role in this carbon cycling that ends up down into the soil. And also cover crops can help with weed control. So they can help outcompete weeds when they're alive. If they have, when they're growing and they have all this above ground biomass, they just shade out weeds and make it so that they're still there. So that weeds can't grow. They can smother weeds when they're terminated. So as in this example here, you can see that this rye is laying down, and there, I believe that's rye that's laying down. And so it's just smothering any weeds that would be there. And it can change the soil microclimate, similarly to what we were just talking about with the microbial community and needing to have a regulated soil temperature. So do seeds when they're germinating and establishing. So if they keep the soil cooler and they also keep the soil darker, then that changes the seed germination and seedling establishment microsite situation, and it makes it harder for weeds to germinate and grow. And also they can have an allelopathic effect on weeds. So allelopathy is the effect of one plant on another via natural chemical compounds, secondary metabolites. They can prevent germination. So essentially, a plant will produce, out in nature, plants produce toxins to ward off other plants to make themselves more competitive. And so some cover crops are known for having these allelopathic effects. And so they can help prevent germination of seeds, of weed seeds. They can help prevent seedling establishment by making the soil not hospitable. Maybe the seed will germinate, but the seedlings can't establish in that soil. These allelopathic chemicals can be exuded off of living roots, just like the exudates that keep the microbes going. These exudates are just allelopathic chemicals. They can be washed off of leaves and shoots by the rain. And they can be released during decay. So if you, for example, if you roll down your rye crop, or you, use a flail mower and you cut it up into tiny little pieces, as it's decaying, that release will create allelopathic chemicals and help prevent your weeds. And they often target specific weed species. So if, just like I was saying, in nature, plants will create these allelopathic chemicals to defend themselves against other plants. And so a lot of times they're focused on certain plants. And so you do want to know what weeds you're up against and whether or not an allelopathic cover crop would help. And generally they help with small seeds and that are more, those tend to be more susceptible to allelopathic cover crops. Some allelopathic cover crops are cereal rye and other winter cereal grains, sorghum Sudan grass hybrids, brassicas, buckwheats, and subterranean clovers. Cover crops can also help with pest control. So if you're having a nematode issue, plant parasitic nematode susceptible rotations can be helpful. So if you're growing something that has a lot of is very susceptible to nematodes, your cash crop is very susceptible to nematodes, like tomatoes, for example, then you could put in a rotation of a non-susceptible cover crop, and then that essentially just starves those nematodes, and they either die or they go somewhere else, and that can help keep down that nematode population. Also, because they're helping to improve the soil health, a lot of times if you have a healthier cash crop, then you're going to have then they're going to be able to resist things like nematodes or any other pests that come along. They also can be used as a natural fumigant. So a biofumigant is a chemical in plant tissue. It kills and or suppresses nematodes and soil and other soil pathogens, just depending on what you're trying to suppress or kill. Brassicas, marigolds, Sudan grass, rye, wheat, hairy vetch, barley, and triticale tend to be good biofumigants. And an example of how this works is the marigold roots will attract nematodes, and the nematodes will come and they'll attack the roots, trying to eat the roots. And then that triggers the marigold to produce these chemicals, these peroxidases. And then those chemicals will activate a nematicide that's inside the root, other chemicals within the roots that activate this nematicide and essentially will kill or at least knock back your nematode population. Another example is a brassica leaf tissue can contain glucosinolates. And so if that's macerated or just broken up, with your Flammo or whatever, and then it's hydrolyzed, it'll produce these enzymes and that combine with other chemicals inside of the plant tissue, creating this nematicide. And that again could help reduce your nematode population. Now, this is just two examples. There's others, and you'd really have to research and think about what your pest is and what is the best cover crop to target that pest. But these are options to use instead of using chemical controls. Then some people like to use cover crop mixes. There's all different, some people are using 26 species of cover crops. Some people just want to use 2. There's really, we're still learning a lot about cover crop mixes and what are the most effective. But you do need to know how much nitrogen a cover crop will provide to the subsequent crop to know how, to get your seeding rate, know when termination time. Some cover crops will provide nitrogen into the soil right away. Some cover crops, like a legume, is producing nitrogen and is fixing nitrogen in the soil. But then like rye might drop nitrogen as it's decomposing. And so that would be a later release of nitrogen. So depending on the cash crop you have, and will depend on the cash crop you're going to have in the next season will depend on the cover crop you want to use if you're using it for nitrogen inputs, for example. Total nitrogen in the cover crop and the cover crop carbon nitrogen ratio is really important. The lower the carbon nitrogen ratio, the more nitrogen is available to the crop at the time of planting. So if you rotate between a high and low carbon and nitrogen cover and cash crops, then you tend to have more available nitrogen at the time. But if your cash crop is one that needs nitrogen later in its growing season, not so much right up front, then you might want to have a cover crop that's going to release it a little bit later. And of course, when it comes to mixes, it's not just about nitrogen and carbon. You have the roots that are down in the soil. And so depending on the structure of your soil, how compact it is, and how you're trying to change the texture of your soil and just the health of your soil, you may want to pick up 2 or 3 different cover crops that have different root structures that will kind of pair nicely to do what you want to do to whatever is happening in your soil. So why use cover crops? Well, they are good for your farm and they're good for the planet. They improve soil health, they rebuild soil organic matter, aeration, compaction, infiltration, water retention, soil microbial community. And they improve the ecosystem services, the nutrient and water cycling, supporting biodiversity, erosion and nitrate pollution, air quality, storing carbon, weed control, pest control, and they can help increase yields because if you have healthier plants that are growing in healthier soil, you're going to get more yield out of them. So in a minute, in a few slides, we will go over questions and answers, but for now, I want to do a plug for what is my next project, which is the Climate Smart project at Rodale. The title of this is Quantifying the Potential to Reduce Greenhouse Gas Emissions and Increase Carbon Sequestration by Growing and Marketing Climate Smart Commodities in the Southern Piedmont. So as I mentioned, with cover crops, there is a lot that we know and there's a lot we don't know about the impact that cover crops have on greenhouse gas emissions. And when it comes to climate and the environment, there isn't just a one-off solution. A lot of times you have to mix things up and to really get the solution that you're looking for. And so in this study, we're going to be looking at greenhouse gases and soil health. And then we're also going to be looking at the economic benefits, the barriers to change impacts, and how to market climate smart commodities. Because if you don't have anyone, if people aren't buying them, then what's the point? So I'll go into this a little bit. These are the Climate Smart partners. The whole purpose to the Climate Smart Commodities program is to create regional partners that can help each other answer questions, build out markets, just increase climate smart farming, which is farming that is better for the environment. There are specifics for what is called climate smart farming, like specifics that fall under that, but essentially you can just think of it as farming that is healthier for the environment and healthier for the soil, and then therefore healthier for you. So our partners are us, Rodale Institute, the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association, Clemson University, the Connect Group, Emory University, Georgia Organics, North Carolina Ag and Tech State University, North Carolina State University, University of Georgia, University of Tennessee, the Soil Health Institute, Virginia Association of Biological Farming, and the University of Wisconsin. We are going to cover the entire Piedmont area, so it's everything that is outlined in blue. We will have 25 farmers markets that are a part of this project, and those will expand across the whole blue section. Then we're going to have, for the soil, the greenhouse gas and soil analysis portion of the project, to understand how cover crops impact greenhouse gases in the southeastern soils, we're going to pick 100 farms. Half of those farms will be conventional and half of those farms will be organic. And you can see this line here, this orange line, that is an imaginary line where there is a thermal gradient. So these dots on this map are organic farms in the region. So all of these dark green dots are in the cooler part of the soil thermal gradient. And all the light green dots are in the warmer part of the thermal gradient. And that's the only thing that's really different and that makes these soils different. These are all soils that when grouped together, one would expect to respond similarly to farming techniques. And the only difference is the temperature gradient. So we're going to have 25 organic farms on the north side, 25 conventional farms on the north side, and 25 of each on the south side. And for this, we are going to study greenhouse gas emissions. And we're going to have each of the farms grow with cover crops, and each of the farms grow without cover crops. And we're going to look at their greenhouse gas emissions, the soil health. All of this is over the course of a 5-year study. We're going to do an economic analysis across the 5 years, the barriers to change analysis. We're going to verify and improve the USDA COMET model for southern farmers, for southern soils. So southern farmers would have the potential to start getting carbon credits for their work if we can improve on that model and verify it. We're going to model greenhouse gas and soil health impacts across the Southeast should all diverse vegetable farmers adopt the cover crop systems that we're going to be asking the farmers to do. And then we're going to be able to, with the information we're gathering, we're going to be able to create recommendations for supporting farmers financially and socially in transitioning to a more climate smart ag over time. The marketing component of the project, we are going to develop and expand markets for climate smart commodities in the Southern Piedmont. We're going to verify and improve farm to facts. This is an app that was created by the University of Wisconsin that farmers can upload onto their phones or do it on their computer, and they enter data about their farm and they assess how climate smart their operation is. And so we're going to verify and improve on that app, as well as that app in the Southeast, which it has not been done yet. We're going to create a consumer education campaign and highlight and promote early adopter climate smart farmers. And through that campaign, we'll assess a suite of communications and marketing materials to educate, influence consumer buy-in. We're also going to track climate smart commodities over time that are produced and sold at market and assess the change over time as we are educating the consumers at the market. We're going to also be tracking whether or not there is on the ground change in terms of increases in the purchase of climate smart commodities. And with these communication and marketing strategies, we're going to be able to come up with recommendations to the USDA on how to market and influence consumer decision-making towards the purchase of value-added climate smart commodities. So essentially, in time, people will educate people on the environmental benefits of farming in this other way that might be a little bit more expensive and therefore a little bit more value added. Each of the 100 farmers that are taking part in the soil health study and the farmers in the markets taking part in the market strategy study are all going to get non-cash and cash incentives. So we have over $6 million set aside for these incentives. Non-cash are things like technical assistance to help with implementing the cash crops on their property, provide project-related farm equipment that might be needed if you've never planted cover crops on your property. Provide vegetable seed for up to 10 acres so that we can ensure that everybody's kind of growing in a rotation that we can actually analyze. Cover crop seed for up to 5 acres. We'll reimburse on inputs for up to 5 acres. Excuse me. And then the cash incentives, we're going to give a per acre cash incentive across the 5 years, and we'll give cash incentives for doing the economic analysis, filling out the COMET model, doing the farm to facts study surveys, participating in barriers to change study. And there's several other items where it's just, little pockets of cash here. You're helping with this piece, so you can get paid for it, just to say our thank you and incentivize participation in the project. For the marketing strategy study, we have over $80,000 in non-cash incentives just from getting the farm to facts account set up at each of the markets. And we also have over $200,000 in cash incentives for market managers and then the participating farmers that are in that part of the project. So do you want to be a participating farm or farmers market in the Climate Smart project? If you are interested in learning more about climate smart farming and marketing climate smart value-added commodities, is your farm a farmers market or a farmers market in the Southern Piedmont? Are you a diverse vegetable farmer? Do you have 4 to 10 acres that has not had cover crops in the last 5 years that you can contribute to the research and get paid to do it? Are you an underserved farmer or a farmer's market that serves predominantly underserved communities? You don't have to be an underserved farmer and you don't have to serve underserved communities, but our goal is to fill the project up with underserved farmers and underserved communities. So but if you are not, that's okay. Let us know. You can email me, anybody who seems like they can at least fill in these criteria right now and would be interested in being a part of the project are welcome to email me, and I'll get back to you with more information about the project. And now I will answer your questions. I see there are 2 questions. Okay, this one says, I grow dragon fruits, so they are not a rotational crop. I have compacted soil in some areas due to use of composted chicken manure. Water does not penetrate very well, even though I can see some roots of the dragon growing. Would cover crops help aeration and will take away from nutrients from my dragons? You can definitely use cover crops around perennial crops. You might want to look into it if it's a cover crop that's going to really scavenge nitrogen and you need a lot of nitrogen for your fruit, for your perennial crop. Maybe that's not the cover crop to use, but you can definitely, if your perennial crop requires a lot of nitrogen, then you can put down clover and grow that. So yes, you can definitely pair them together. Do we know what the costs of using cover crops are compared to other methods? How do the costs of buying the seed and the time, effort to manage them compare against tilling? Well, that's interesting. I'm sure there's data out there that will give you that answer, but specifically here in the Southeast, that is what we're going to be addressing with the Climate Smart project. So we're going to have farmers provide us economic data in the fields that they are using cover crops and in the fields they are not using cover crops, and in organic versus conventional. So we'll be able to answer some of those questions a little bit more defined. How did we get involved with Climate Smart how do we get involved in Climate Smart if we're in PA? Well, honestly, this is a Southeastern project. And so we are working here in the Southeast. So I'm not sure. I'd have to think about that if there is for this specific project, but there may be some in Pennsylvania that I'm not aware of that are Pennsylvania specific. So if you send me an email, I can look into that and see. How can we derive the most benefits from cover crops after a late harvesting cash crop species in a cold temperature climate, considering the short period between harvest and first frost? So that's a good question. There are cover crops that are very quick growing. You can also interseed your cover crops so that they are planted, they're planted and growing and maybe just little seedlings, depending on what your cash crop is. If they're just little seedlings in the rows between, you can interseed them between your cash crops early so that they got a start and they get a little bit longer before it's actually time to harvest those vegetables. Let's see, for the Climate Smart project, is there any similar research going on in the Northeast? That I know of, no, but that doesn't mean there isn't. I do know that for this particular project, for our greenhouse gas emissions that we're going to be looking at ammonia methane, carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxide. And that combination is rare if it's ever been done before. So that is new technology that we'll be using, especially for the ammonia. But I'm not sure if there's any climate smart projects are happening in the Northeast. Does anyone have any other questions? We have approximately 8 minutes. So I am looking in the question and answer section. That's where everybody should be submitting their questions. Oh, here we go. If weeds get suppressed, no germination from a mat of plant material, how can my cash crop germinate successfully in it? Well, that's a good question. So you generally what you do is create a furrow between those within the residue that will allow for your cash crop to come up right in that very narrow area. Could you also provide your email, please? What I will do is put it back to this screen, and my email is right there. Other than buying local and organic, how can someone support this work without being an actual farmer? Well, obviously buying local and organic is great. But I think knowing your farms, knowing the farms that you are purchasing from, or having an idea over the large company that you're purchasing from, and just kind of understanding that is helpful. But I think with any change that's going to come on a large scale, my personal go-to is to say, know who your political people are, who your congressman is, who your senator is, who your state representatives are, and vote for people who support what you want. Because the Climate Smart Grant, for example, is a grant that is it was a new funding opportunity, brand new, that was supported by the Biden administration. And, it's because of his efforts trying to make a change for the climate that brought on this. And so yeah, vote and vote well. Would cover crops help eliminate very invasive Bermuda grass? So Bermuda grass is very invasive. I do think that there are some cover crops that could do that. You may have to take your sections of your production out of production for longer than one season. You might have to do it in chunks. But you should talk to your local NRCS agents and see what they have to say just for your area. But they can help. Do I still get any value of planting a cover crop if I kill it too early? There's that sweet spot when is the perfect time to terminate a cover crop, but you're always, even if you terminate it too early to get the optimal nutrient benefits from it, you've still gotten the benefit of having the roots in the ground and holding the soil on the property, helping to scavenge the nutrients that are left over from the previous season. There's helping with compaction, helping with aeration. There's a lot that you get from a cover crop beyond just nutrients. And so yeah, you do get a benefit from it, even if maybe you didn't get the whole package completely the way you could, in its perfect form, but you definitely get benefits from them. What are the different soil health parameters you are looking at? For the Climate Smart Grant, we're going to be looking at, we have a whole list. We're going to be looking at nutrient levels, compaction, or nutrient levels, aggregate stability, and carbon, and bulk density. And there might be another one I'm missing. What do you think about the system which Christine Jones talks about with 4 functional plant groups in the cover crop for the benefit of the microbiome of the plants. Well, like I said, if you have, different cover crops have different benefits. So if you have different functional groups, you can get more benefit, more bang for your buck. So again, really, it just depends on what your goal is. If you're just looking for the most nitrogen you can get in the soil, plant all legumes, or maybe plant a couple different kinds of legumes. If you're trying really hard to improve your microbial community, then yeah, maybe have the functional groups. So it really is very dependent on you, your property, and where your soil is at and what you're trying to get on what is the best bang for your buck. But I certainly wouldn't say don't plant plant in 4 functional groups. I think that it just depends on what you want to get out of it. How's the amount of carbon in the atmosphere or microbes in the soil, often referred to in tons, actually weighed? Oh, that is a great question that I feel will stumble over the answer. So if you want to email me, I will figure that out and get you a better answer than I could provide right now. How do you plan for roller crimping if I have a cover crop mix? So if you have a cover crop mix, you're going to have to find the sweet spot in between when one is ready to terminate versus the other, because one may be a little, ready to be terminated sooner than the other one. And so you just want to kind of think about, if you allow the early cover crop, if you allow it to go to seed and some seed drop, is that going to cause you a major weed issue in the future? If not, and if it doesn't matter to you, then you could wait until the other one matures. If it is going to create that, then you might want to just go for it earlier. So what are some cover crops that can help with getting rid of white goosefoot and thistle? I don't really know. I'm really mostly familiar with the Southeast, and I'm not sure, but if you send me an email, I can ask my colleagues and see what they have to say. What are the best cover crops for home gardens? So you can really, I have clover in my flower beds out front. You can put whatever you want down there, and you just depends on what you're growing and when you want to terminate it. What resources can help you figure out which covers will help which situations? So I would go to NRCS. The NRCS has a lot in your area, will have information on cover crops and in which ones in your area are the best ones. And that also probably would answer the last 2 questions. So really going to your NRCS agent and talking to them about it would probably be the most effective. You can also, of course, connect with the Rodale consulting team at any time, and we'd be happy to talk with you too. We have consultants across the Southeast or all across the United States. So if you are specifically organic and you don't feel you're getting what you need from other resources, you're welcome to connect with us. Okay, it's 3:01, so I think I better get going so I don't get in too much trouble for going overboard. Thank you very much for attending and all of your great questions. And I look forward to meeting you in my email if any of you email me. Thank you.